The darkness between stars has never been empty. It teems with the silent traffic of empires, the slow migration of ambitions too vast for any single world to contain. For 50,000 years, the Gavar have moved through this darkness like a tide, rising and falling across systems, consuming and consolidating, until their territory spanned 1,000 worlds and their name became synonymous with inevitability itself. They were not the oldest species in the galaxy. They were not the wisest, nor the most technologically gifted. But they possessed something that had proven, time and again, more valuable than any of these: patience. The Gavar understood that empires are not built in generations, but in millennia. They understood that the universe rewards those who wait, who watch, who strike not when the iron is hot, but when it has cooled enough to be handled without burning dot. By the time humanity was learning to walk upright on the savannas of their distant world, the Gavar had already forgotten more conquests than most species would ever attempt, and by the time humanity split the atom, the Gavar had grown comfortable. The command bridge of the dreadnought, indomitable will, was a cathedral to that comfort. Its vaulted ceilings rose 30 meters above the deck, disappearing into shadows where bioluminescent fixtures pulsed with the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of the ship's core. The walls were lined with the preserved carapaces of conquered species, not as trophies of war, but as decorations, as casually displayed as a human might hang a painting. They had become interior design. That was the true measure of Gavar dominance. They had grown bored enough to decorate with the remains of their enemies. Fleet Commander Xylos stood at the center of this vast space, his 6 limbs folded in the posture of deep contemplation that his species reserved for matters of negligible importance. His carapace was the deep crimson of aged wine, marked with the ceremonial scarification of 5 centuries of service. His compound eyes, each facet gleaming with the cold light of distant stars, swept across the holographic display before him without interest. The display showed a star system: yellow dwarf, unremarkable. 8 planets, 3 in the habitable zone, only 1 with significant biological activity. The 3rd rock from the sun. The scouts had designated it Tellus, after the old Gavar word for dirt. It was fitting. From orbit, the planet was a smear of blue and green and white, pretty enough in the way that a child's painting might be pretty, but ultimately primitive, unfinished. Xylos's mandibles clicked once, a sound of mild distaste. "Report," he said. His voice was a dry rasp, like wind over stone. Carrying effortlessly through the bridge's recycled air, Sub-Commander Vithan approached, his own carapace a lighter shade of burgundy, his posture radiating the eagerness of youth. Vithan had seen only 2 centuries of service. He had never witnessed a failed conquest. He had never witnessed anything but success. It made him insufferably optimistic. "The scout data is complete, Commander," Bethune said, gesturing with 2 upper limbs at the hologram, which obligingly zoomed in on the blue-green world. Species classification: carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, mammalian descent. Bipedal, soft-bodied, individually fragile. Technological level: Tier 3, with recent advancement into nuclear capability. Social structure: fractured into approximately 195 distinct political entities, frequently engaged in internal conflict. Population: approximately 8 billion. Xylos absorbed this information without reaction. 8 billion. That was more than he had expected. The soft-bodied ones tended to breed quickly. It was their primary survival strategy, compensating for individual weakness with numerical proliferation. Like insects, like the swarming creatures on the swamp worlds of the Outer Veil. Internal conflict, Xylos repeated. They fight amongst themselves? Constantly, Bethan confirmed, and there was something approaching amusement in his voice. The scout probes intercepted extensive historical records. They have never known peace. Their entire history is a catalog of warfare, tribal, national, ideological, religious. They have developed weapons of increasing sophistication specifically for use against their own kind. Xylos turned this over in his mind. It was unusual. Most species, upon reaching Tier 3 technology and the capacity for self-destruction that came with it, unified under a single global government. It was the natural progression of intelligence, the recognition that internal division was a luxury that nuclear weapons made untenable. But these humans had apparently looked into the abyss of their own annihilation and decided to build a house on the edge. "Show me their military capabilities," Xylos said. The hologram shifted, displaying images gathered by stealth probes that had skimmed the edge of the human system for decades without detection. Gavar technology was subtle when it needed to be. The humans, for all their nuclear progress, had never noticed the silent watchers in the dark. The images were underwhelming. Primitive aircraft, held aloft by aerodynamic lift rather than anti-gravity. Naval vessels that floated on the surface of water instead of passing through it. Ground vehicles that rolled on wheels for the ancestors' sake. And weapons projectile launchers that fired chemically propelled slugs, explosive devices dropped from aircraft, and the crude nuclear warheads that had apparently ended their last global conflict before it could begin. Xylos felt something he had not experienced in centuries, the faint stirring of interest. Not because the humans were dangerous. They were manifestly not dangerous, but because they were so perfectly, classically primitive. It was like looking at a fossil, a preserved specimen from the early days of galactic civilization. They were a museum piece, frozen in time, unaware that the universe had moved on without them. "And they have no knowledge of us?" Xylos asked. "None," Vethin confirmed. "Their radio astronomy has detected anomalous signals, but they interpret them as natural phenomena. Their deep space observation is laughably inadequate. They have not even established a permanent presence on their own moon." Xylos's mandibles clicked again, this time in satisfaction. A virgin world. Untouched, unaware, undefended. The last such world discovered by the Gavar had been 5,000 years ago. Since then, every newly contacted species had at least some awareness of the larger galactic community, some fragment of knowledge that complicated the conquest. But these humans, they were pure, fresh. "The fleet is assembled?" Xylos asked. "1 dreadnought, 12 support vessels, 6 troop carriers," Vethin recited. "Standard subjugation complement. The High Council has authorized immediate action. They consider this a low-priority acquisition." Of course they did. The High Council, safe in their spires on the home world, had long since lost any understanding of what conquest actually meant. To them, it was paperwork. A system to be added to the ledger, a population to be catalogued, resources to be allocated. They did not stand on bridges and look upon unsuspecting worlds. They did not feel the weight of an entire species resting on their decisions. Xylos did. And despite his boredom, despite the routine nature of the mission, he felt that weight now. 8 billion lives. 8 billion souls who had no idea that their world was about to end. "Begin the approach," Xylos commanded. "Standard emergence point, outer system. I want a full sensor sweep before we commit to orbital insertion." Vethin hesitated. "Commander, the outer system is empty. There are no defenses, no early warning satellites, no picket ships. We could emerge in low orbit, and they would never see us coming until we were already upon them." Xylos turned his compound eyes fully on his subordinate, and Vethin had the grace to lower his gaze. "We will do this by the doctrine," Xylos said, his voice carrying the weight of 5 centuries of service. "The doctrine exists for a reason. We will emerge at the edge of their system. We will approach with deliberate speed. We will give them time to see us coming, to understand what they face. And then, when fear has done its work, we will deliver the compliance strike. One city, one demonstration, and then we will wait for their surrender. But Commander, if we could simply, Xylos interrupted, then we would be no different from the species we conquered. The Gavar do not conquer through stealth and surprise. We conquer through the overwhelming weight of inevitability. We give our enemies time to contemplate their defeat. We show them the face of their destruction and allow them the dignity of choosing survival. It is not mercy, Vethin. It is efficiency. A species that surrenders is a species that can be integrated. A species that is simply destroyed is a waste of resources. Vethin nodded, properly chastened. Of course, Commander. I did not mean to imply. You meant to imply efficiency, Xylos said, and there was something almost like warmth in his voice. It is not a bad instinct. But efficiency without context is just speed, and speed without direction is chaos. Remember that. The bridge crew moved with practiced precision, executing the commander's orders. The FTL drives hummed, building toward the moment of transition. On the main holographic display, the distant yellow star grew brighter as the navigation systems locked on to its gravitational signature. Xylos turned away from the display. Walking toward the observation bay, they formed the forward wall of the bridge. Through the transparent alloy, he could see the stars streaking past as the ship prepared to fold space. They would emerge in 12 hours, standard, on the edge of the human system. 12 hours until he looked upon this primitive world with his own eyes. He thought about the humans. 8 billion of them, fighting amongst themselves, unaware that something far larger than their petty conflicts was bearing down upon them. They had probably never even considered the possibility of alien life. They had probably looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone, never realizing that the darkness between those stars was crowded with watchers. Soon they would know. Soon they would look up and see not stars, but ships. Not hope, but inevitability. Xylos felt nothing. No anticipation, no excitement, no dread. He had done this 100 times before, on 100 different worlds. The details varied: different atmospheres, different biologies, different cultural responses to the moment of revelation, but the outcome was always the same. The primitives would resist, briefly and ineffectively. They would lose. They would surrender. They would be integrated, and the Gavar Empire would grow slightly larger, slightly more powerful, slightly more comfortable. It was, Xylos reflected, a good life. A life of purpose and certainty. A life without surprises. He should have known better. After 5 centuries, he should have known that the universe always saves its surprises for those who have grown too comfortable. But he did not know. None of them did. Not yet. 12 hours remained until the indomitable will emerged from FTL and pointed its weapons at a small blue world. 12 hours until the humans looked up and saw their first starships. 12 hours until everything changed. And on that small blue world, 8 billion humans went about their lives, arguing and loving and fighting and dreaming, completely unaware that the predators had arrived at the edge of their territory. Hunt was about to begin. The emergence from FTL was always accompanied by a moment of profound silence, not the silence of empty space. That was a myth, a poetic fancy that actual spacefarers knew to be false. Space hummed with radiation, sang with the solar wind, crackled with the static discharge of stellar bodies. But the transition from folded space to real space was different. For one terrible, beautiful moment, the ship existed everywhere and nowhere at once. And when it finally settled into its destination, There was always a heartbeat of absolute stillness before the universe remembered to make its presence known. On the bridge of the indomitable will, that heartbeat passed. And then the universe remembered. "Emergence complete," Vethon reported, his voice steady with the practiced calm of a career officer. "All systems nominal. Drive coherence at 98.7%. Shield cycling up to standby levels." Xylos stood at the center of the bridge, his 6 limbs arranged in the posture of command, his compound eyes fixed on the forward observation bay. The stars ahead of them had shifted, reconfigured themselves into an unfamiliar pattern. And there, directly ahead, small but growing larger with each passing moment, was the sun the humans called Soldat. It was unremarkable. A yellow dwarf, G-type main sequence star, middle-aged and stable. There were millions like it in the galaxy. But as Xylos watched, he could see the faint pinprick of light that marked the third planet, and he found himself studying it with an attention he had not anticipated. "Full sensor sweep," he commanded. "I want to know everything within 5 light hours of this vessel. Every rock, every gas cloud, every piece of debris. Leave nothing unexamined." The tactical officer, a grizzled veteran named Thesson, whose carapace bore the scars of the Cygnus uprising, bent to his task. The indomitable will was not merely a warship. It was a mobile sensor platform, capable of detecting a single heat signature from half a system away. If the humans had any surprises waiting in the dark, the Gavar would find them. They found nothing. "Outer system is clean, Commander," Thesson reported after several minutes of scanning. "No artificial satellites beyond the orbit of the 4th planet. No stealth emplacements. No mines, no pickets, no early warning networks. The humans have not even placed observation platforms on their own outermost worlds." Xylos absorbed this without comment. It was consistent with the scout data, but consistency did not guarantee truth. He had learned, over 5 centuries, that the universe had a habit of hiding its sharpest teeth in the softest mouths. "Begin the approach," he said. 1/4 sublight. I want a full system scan as we go. And prepare the broadcast." The broadcast. The ritual declaration of intent that had preceded every Gavar conquest for 50,000 years. It was not a negotiation, not a warning, not an offer. It was a statement of fact, delivered on all frequencies, in all languages that the target species might understand. It told them who was coming, why they were coming, and what would happen if they chose to resist. Vethan approached, carrying a data crystal in one manipulative limb. "The translation matrix is ready, Commander. We've compiled everything the scouts learned about human languages. There are approximately 7,000 actively spoken dialects on Tellus, but we've identified 23 that account for over half the population. The broadcast will cycle through all of them. 7,000 languages." Xylos found himself momentarily impressed despite himself. Most species consolidated around a single tongue by the time they reached Tier 2 technology. The fact that these humans had maintained such diversity suggested either a remarkable tolerance for difference or a complete inability to agree on anything. Based on the scout reports of their constant internal warfare, he suspected the latter. "Send it," Xylos commanded. "Continuous loop until we reach orbit." The broadcast went out a simple message, translated and retranslated, spreading across the void at the speed of light. It would reach Earth in approximately 30 minutes, carried on wavelengths that human receivers could easily detect. By the time the indomitable will reached orbital insertion, every government on the planet would know that they were no longer alone. The message was this: asterisk to the inhabitants of Tellus. "This is Fleet Commander Xylos of the Gavar Empire. We have observed your world for many cycles. We have studied your species, your cultures, your capabilities. We find you suitable for integration into our dominion. You will offer no resistance. You will make no attempt to flee or hide. You will await further instructions. Compliance will be rewarded with survival. Resistance will be rewarded with extinction. You have until we reach your world to consider your response. Asterisk it was. Xylos reflected, generous. Many species offered no warning at all. Many simply appeared in orbit and began the subjugation process without preamble. But the Gaver had learned, long ago, that the anticipation of doom was often more effective than doom itself. The waiting, the watching, the helpless awareness of approaching destruction. These things broke species in ways that weapons could not. 30 minutes passed. The fleet continued its slow, deliberate approach. On the bridge, the crew went about their duties with the practiced efficiency of beings who had done this many times before. There was no tension, no anticipation. This was routine. And then 31 minutes after the broadcast went out, the first human response arrived. It was not what they expected. "Commander," Vethan said, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "We're receiving something." Xylos turned. "Defying something." Vethan gestured at the communications console, which was displaying a cascade of data that seemed to grow more chaotic by the second. "It's everything, Commander. Every frequency, every bandwidth, every modulation. The humans are broadcasting on wavelengths we didn't even know they could access. It's not organized. It's not a single message. It's millions of messages, all at once." Xylos moved to the console, studying the data with growing incomprehension. Vethan was right. The airwaves around Earth, and now, increasingly, around the entire inner system, were saturated with human communications. Radio, television, digital data streams, military frequencies, civilian networks, everything. It was a wall of noise, formless and chaotic, and it was growing louder by the moment. "Filter it," Xylos ordered. "Find the official response." The governments must be coordinating something. But there was no official response. Or rather, there were hundreds of official responses, all contradicting each other. The tactical officer managed to isolate a few of the stronger signals, translating them through the ship's linguistic matrix. And what emerged was not fear, not surrender, not even the organized resistance they had anticipated. It was confusion. "Repeat. We are receiving an unidentified transmission on multiple frequencies. This is the North American Aerospace Defense Command. If this is a hoax, stand down immediately. If this is real, Moscow confirms detection of anomalous signals from outer system. No official statement yet, but sources indicate people of China do not panic. The government is aware of the situation and is taking appropriate measures. Oh my God, it's real. It's actually real. We're not alone. We're not. Can anyone confirm this? Is anyone else seeing this? The signal is coming from the edge of the system. It's military forces on highest alert. We repeat, this is not a drill. All personnel report to." What do they want? What are they saying? The translation is unclear, but it sounds like Xylos listened. And for the first time in centuries, he felt something approaching unease. This was not the response of a unified species facing an external threat. This was the response of a species that had never faced an external threat, that had no protocols for this situation. That was reacting not as a civilization, but as 8 billion individuals, each with their own opinion, their own fear, their own plan. Should have been reassuring. Disorganized species were easy to conquer. They could not coordinate resistance, could not mount a unified defense. The Gaver had crushed 100 such species, watching them collapse into internal chaos as the fleet approached. But this was different. This was not collapse. This was acceleration. "Commander," Thesson reported, his voice carrying an edge of something that might have been concern. "I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations on the planet's surface. Multiple sources. They're powering up everything. military installations, industrial centers, even civilian power grids. The energy output has increased by 300% in the last 10 minutes. Xylos stared at the tactical display, watching as the planet below them began to glow with the signature of industrial activity. It was like watching a sleeping animal wake, slowly at first, then all at once, senses sharpening, muscles tensing. "They're preparing," Bethan said, stating the obvious. "For what?" Xylos asked. "They have no ships, no orbital defenses, no weapons that can reach us. What are they preparing for?" No one had an answer. The fleet continued its approach. They passed the orbit of Mars, the red planet spinning silently below them, its surface dotted with primitive automated probes that the humans had sent to study their own system. The probes detected the fleet's passage, and their signals joined the cacophony, adding to the wall of noise that now surrounded the Gavr ships. And still the humans broadcast. Still they argued and panicked and organized and prepared. Xylos ordered his linguists to continue monitoring, to try to find some pattern in the chaos, some sign of a coordinated response. There was none. There was only noise, but it was noise with a shape. It was noise that, the closer they got to Earth, began to sound less like panic and more like communication, like millions of voices all speaking at once, but somehow, impossibly, beginning to find a common rhythm. "Commander," Vethin said, his voice now clearly troubled. "I think they're arguing about what to do." "Arguing?" "Yes. The translations are rough, but there are factions. Some are calling for surrender. Some are calling for negotiation. Some are calling for resistance." Xylos considered this. "And which faction is winning?" Vethin was silent for a long moment, studying the data. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "All of them, Commander. They're all winning. There is no consensus. There is only debate, endless debate. It's like watching a species think in real time." Xylos turned away from the console, walking back to the observation bay. Earth was visible now, a blue crescent growing larger with each passing hour. Beautiful, fragile, unaware of how close it was to the end. He thought about the doctrine, the compliance strike. One city vaporized from orbit, a demonstration of power that would shatter their will to resist. It had worked 100 times before. It would work again, wouldn't it? "The humans have 30 hours until we reach orbit," Xylos announced, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Continue monitoring. Continue the broadcast loop. And prepare the kinetic launcher for the compliance strike. Target selection will be made upon arrival." He paused, looking at the blue world below, and someone find out what they're building. All that energy output. Someone find out where it's going 30 hours past dot in that time. The human planet did not sleep. Xylos watched in something approaching fascination as the energy signatures on the surface continued to rise, peaking and plateauing, and then rising again, as if the entire species had decided to work through the night and into the next day and the day after that, as if sleep had become a luxury they could no longer afford. The broadcasts continued. The arguments continued. But something had changed. The panic was gone, replaced by something harder, something colder. The humans had moved through fear and out the other side, into a state that Xylos's linguists struggled to translate. The closest they could come was determination, but that word carried none of the edge, none of the ferocity that colored the human transmissions now. The indomitable will reached orbit. From this height, Earth was breathtaking. Swirls of white cloud covered blue oceans and green continents, and at the terminator line between day and night, the lights of human cities glittered like scattered jewels. It was beautiful in a way that Xylos had not anticipated, beautiful in a way that made the coming destruction feel almost like a crime. But the doctrine was the doctrine, and the compliance strike was necessary. Target selected, Vithin reported, his voice carefully neutral. City designated by humans as Dubai. Population approximately 3 million. Coastal location, minimal cloud cover, optimal visibility. The strike will be visible from hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Xylos studied the target data. Dubai, a city of glass and steel, rising from the desert like a dream. The humans had built it in a place where no city should exist, had forced the environment to bend to their will. It was, in its own primitive way, impressive. Why this city? Xylos asked. It is a center of commerce and tourism, Vithon explained. Not a military target. The destruction will be purely civilian. According to human psychology, this maximizes the terror response. They will see that nowhere is safe, that even their cities of pleasure and profit can be erased in an instant. Xylos nodded. It was sound doctrine. Strike a non-military target, and you strike at the will of the people. Strike a military target, and you only strengthen their resolve. Prepare the launcher, he commanded. Single kinetic projectile. Mass, 100 tons. Velocity, 0.1 light speed. Yield, sufficient to vaporize the target city and create a crater visible from orbit. Broadcast the targeting data on all frequencies. I want them to see it coming. The crew moved to obey. On the main display, a schematic of the indomitable will showed the massive kinetic launcher along the ship's spine, its magnetic rails beginning to hum with power. The projectile, a simple rod of tungsten alloy, was loaded into the breech. The targeting systems locked onto Dubai Dot, and on the planet below, the humans watched. They had to know. Their primitive sensors could not have missed the energy buildup, the targeting scans. Every government on Earth knew that a weapon was being aimed at them. Every military was tracking the indomitable will's position, calculating trajectories, predicting impact points. The broadcasts had changed again. The arguing had stopped. Now there was only silence on frequencies, and on others, a quiet, steady stream of what the linguists eventually identified as prayers. The humans were asking their gods for help. Xylos felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. It passed. Fire, he commanded. The kinetic launcher released. The projectile accelerated along the magnetic rails, building speed with every meter until it exited the launch tube and began its silent fall toward Earth. At 0.1 light speed, it would take less than 15 seconds to reach the atmosphere. 15 seconds for the humans to watch their death approaching. 15 seconds to understand that their gods were not listening. On the bridge, the crew watched the tactical display as the projectile's trajectory line intersected with the city of Dubai. On the surface, Xylos knew millions of humans were looking up, seeing nothing yet, but knowing. Always knowing. 12 seconds. And then the universe surprised him. Commander. Theson's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Multiple launches from the planet's surface. Missiles, hundreds of them. Xylos spun to the tactical display, and for one impossible moment, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. From every corner of the planet, from silos and submarines and mobile launchers, the humans had launched their nuclear weapons. Not at the fleet. They couldn't reach the fleet. Their primitive missiles didn't have the range. They had launched them at nothing, at empty space, at trajectories that would take them nowhere near the Gavr ships. What are they doing? Vithin breathed. They're shooting at nothing. The projectile continued its fall. 10 seconds. 9. And then the missiles began to detonate, not on impact. Not at their targets. They detonated in space, in a wide arc between the indomitable will and the planet below. Nuclear fire bloomed in the void, one after another, until a wall of radiation and electromagnetic pulse stretched across the sky. The projectile passed through it. For a moment, nothing happened. The tungsten rod continued its trajectory, untouched by the radiation, undamaged by the EMP. It was solid metal. It didn't care about light and heat, but its guidance systems did. The projectile had been aimed with precision, its course calculated to the millimeter. But as it passed through the nuclear fire, the radiation played havoc with its internal systems. Not destroying them, they were hardened against such things, but confusing them, corrupting them, making them hesitate for microseconds that translated into kilometers of error. The projectile emerged from the nuclear cloud and continued toward Earth, but it was no longer aimed at Dubai. We can't hit them with missiles. They're right about that. Their point defense is too good, their sensors too sharp. But missiles aren't the only things we have in space. We've got satellites. We've got the International Space Station. We've got debris-old rocket stages, defunct probes, discarded equipment. We've got the entire orbital ecosystem of half a century of spaceflight. Chun stared at her. You want to throw junk at them? I want to throw everything at them. Thorne pulled up an image on the main display, showing the cluttered orbital environment around Earth. Thousands of objects, from functioning satellites to tiny fragments of debris, circled the planet in a chaotic ballet. We've got maybe 15,000 tracked objects in orbit. If we could deorbit them, all of them, at once and aim them at the alien fleet, we'd create a debris field, Volkov breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. A cloud of high-velocity impacts. Their point defense couldn't stop them all. Point defense is designed to stop incoming threats, Thorne agreed. Missiles, projectiles, things that are trying to hit you. But debris? Debris is just there. It's not maneuvering, not guiding, not threatening. Until suddenly it is. Chun's mind was racing now, running through the implications, the obstacles, the sheer impossibility of what this young engineer was proposing. 15,000 objects, each with its own trajectory, its own velocity, its own orbital characteristics. Coordinating them to impact the alien fleet simultaneously would require calculations that made the earlier missile defense look like simple arithmetic. How long? She asked. Thorne met her eyes. If every spacefaring nation on Earth cooperates? If we share data, coordinate maneuvers, override every safety protocol ever written? 12 hours. Maybe less. 12 hours. The aliens would not wait 12 hours. They would act sooner, strike again, find a way around the defenses that humanity had thrown up. But maybe? We don't need 12 hours, Chun said slowly, the idea taking shape as she spoke. We need a distraction. Something to keep them busy while we prepare. Wei was already ahead of her. Another missile launch. Not to hit them, to make them look the other way. To occupy their point defense while we move the debris into position. Can we launch again? Volkov asked. We used 300 missiles in the last strike. Our silos are depleted, our submarines out of position. We don't need nukes, Chun interrupted. We need noise. We need them looking at one thing while we do another. We've got conventional missiles, cruise missiles, anti-aircraft batteries. Hell, we've got fireworks. If we launch everything we've got, all at once, in their direction, they'll shoot it all down, Wei finished. But while they're shooting, they're not watching the debris. The room fell silent as the enormity of the plan sank in. It was insane. It was desperate. It was the kind of plan that only a species facing extinction could conceive, let alone attempt, and it just might work. Make the calls, Chun said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Every nation, every space agency, every military. Tell them what we need. Tell them we have 12 hours to move heaven and earth, literally, or we won't have a heaven or earth to move. The room exploded into motion. High above, on the bridge of the indomitable will, Xylos watched the planet below and felt the first stirrings of something he had not experienced in centuries, that uncertainty, that the humans were not reacting as they should. After the failed strike, they should have been in chaos. Their governments collapsing, their populations rioting. Their brief moment of triumph giving way to the realization that they had merely delayed the inevitable. Instead, they had gone quiet. Not the quiet of surrender. Xylos had seen that 100 times, and this was different. This was the quiet of preparation. What are they doing? He asked, not expecting an answer. Vithan provided one anyway. Energy signatures are spiking again. Not military, at least, not primarily military. They're powering up their space infrastructure. Launch sites, tracking stations, communication arrays. And Commander. They're moving their satellites. Zillow's turned. Moving them? Changing orbits. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. It's a coordinated maneuver. They're repositioning their entire orbital network. Xylos stared at the tactical display, watching as the swarm of human satellites began to shift, slowly at first, then with increasing purpose. They were herding themselves, gathering into patterns that his tactical systems struggled to parse. It looked like chaos. It looked like order. It looked like both at once. What are they doing? He asked again, this time with real urgency. No one answered. Because no one knew. Because no one had ever seen a species do this before. Because the humans, in their desperation, were writing a new rulebook for interstellar war, and the Gaver were still trying to read the old one. On the surface, in the bunker beneath the Rockies, General Sarah Chun watched the clock and waited 12 hours. They had 12 hours to save their world, and in orbit, the debris began to move. 11 hours and 47 minutes had passed since General Chun gave the order. In that time, the impossible had become merely improbable, and the improbable was rapidly giving way to the inevitable. The Gaver fleet had done nothing. They had watched and waited and tried to understand. And while they watched, humanity moved. On the bridge of the indomitable will, Fleet Commander Xylos stood at the center of a storm of data, his compound eyes darting across displays that refused to resolve into anything comprehensible. The humans had launched again not nuclear weapons this time, but a barrage of conventional missiles so vast that it defied belief. Thousands of them, then tens of thousands, rising from every continent on thermal plumes that lit up the night side of the planet like a second dawn. Point defense is engaged, Thesson reported, his voice strained with the effort of coordinating the fleet's response. We're destroying them as fast as they launch, but there are too many. They're saturating our systems. Xylos watched as the tactical display filled with red icons, each one a human missile on its way to nowhere. They weren't aimed at the fleet. They couldn't reach the fleet. They were aimed at empty space, at trajectories that would take them harmlessly past the Gaver position, and into the void beyond. It was madness. It was glorious, incomprehensible madness. They're not trying to hit us, Lethan said, his voice carrying the wonder of revelation. They're trying to distract us. From what? Xylos demanded. The answer came 3 seconds later. Commander. Theson's scream cut through the bridge like a blade. Debris field. Multiple impacts. They're coming from all directions. The indomitable will lurched as something struck its hull. Not a weapon. Weapons had signatures, trajectories, intent. This was just mass. A piece of human satellite, traveling at orbital velocity, slamming into the dreadnought's unshielded flank. Then another. And another. And another. Xylos watched in frozen horror as the tactical display revealed the truth. While his fleet had been focused on the missile barrage, the humans had been moving their orbital infrastructure, not into defensive positions, but into intercept trajectories. Thousands of pieces of debris, from defunct rocket stages to the International Space Station itself, had been carefully, precisely maneuvered into paths that intersected with the Gavar, fleet dot, and now they were arriving. The indomitable will shook again, harder this time. Alarms blared as damage reports flooded in. A support vessel on the fleet's flank took a direct hit from a spent booster stage, its shields designed for energy weapons and missiles, not kinetic debris, collapsing under the impact. Another ship reported hull breaches. A third went dark entirely as its reactor containment failed. Evasive maneuvers. Xylos shouted. Voice was lost in the chaos. But evasive maneuvers required predictable threats. The debris field was not predictable. It was chaos given form, entropy weaponized. The accumulated junk of half a century of human spaceflight transformed into the most devastating orbital bombardment the galaxy had ever seen. A piece of debris perhaps no larger than a human fist struck the observation bay directly in front of Xylos. The transparent alloy held, but cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. And through those cracks, Xylos could see the planet below. Blue and green and white, beautiful and terrible, the source of all this madness. And then he saw something else, a single vessel emerging from the chaos. It was tiny compared to the Gavar ships, a converted mining vessel, its hull patched and scarred, its engines burning with the desperate fury of a species that refused to die. It was not fleeing. It was not hiding. It was accelerating directly toward the indomitable will. What is that? Vathan breathed. Xylos knew. In that moment, with 5 centuries of conquest behind him and the weight of 1,000 dead worlds on his conscience, he knew exactly what he was seeing, Dot. It was a human weapon. The oldest weapon of all. Flesh and steel. Thrown against the enemy because there was nothing else left to throw. Target that vessel, he commanded, his voice strangely calm. Destroy it. The point defense systems turned, locked on, fired. The mining vessel disintegrated 3 seconds from impact, its crew volunteers all. Engineers and miners who had never fired a shot in anger vaporized in an instant. But in those 3 seconds, Xylos saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his existence. He saw the face of a species that would rather die than surrender. He saw the face of prey that had become predator. He saw humanity. And in that moment, Fleet Commander Xylos of the Gavar Empire, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, made a decision that would echo through the ages. All ships, he said, his voice carrying across the fleet with the weight of absolute authority. Break off the attack. Prepare for immediate withdrawal. Vathan stared at him. Commander, we can still win. We can. There is no winning, Xylos interrupted. Not against this. Not against them. We can destroy their world. We can kill every last human. But we cannot conquer them. And if we cannot conquer them, then victory is meaningless. He looked one last time at the blue world below, at the species that had refused to be prey. Sound the retreat. The Gavar fleet retreated in silence. Not the silence of victory, nor the silence of defeat. It was something deeper, the silence of species, confronting a truth too large to comprehend. Behind them, the debris field continued its endless dance, human satellites tumbling through the void, their sacrifice complete. And below, on the blue world they had come to conquer, 8 billion humans emerged from bunkers and shelters to look up at the sky where their enemies had been. There was no celebration. General Sarachon stood on the surface, outside the mountain that had sheltered her, and watched the last glimmer of alien drives fade into the darkness. Beside her, Wei and Volkov stood in silence, their differences forgotten, their nations united by something none of them had words for. We won, Volkov said finally. It was not a question. Chun shook her head slowly. We survived. That's not the same thing. On the bridge of the indomitable will, light years away and growing more distant with every moment, Fleet Commander Xylos stood alone before the observation bay. The cracks in the transparent alloy still spider-webbed across his view, a permanent reminder of what he had witnessed. Vethin approached quietly. "Commander, what do we tell the High Council?" Xylos was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of a truth he had spent 5 centuries avoiding. "Tell them that we found a species that fights not for territory, not for resources, not for glory. Tell them we found a species that fights because the alternative is unthinkable. Tell them we found a species that turned its own world into a weapon, its own people into shields, its own despair into defiance." He paused, looking back at the blue world that was no longer visible, but would never be forgotten. "Tell them we found humanity, and for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human."